If you're listening to me right now, somewhere in the world where the day is already moving without asking permission, tell me just in your own heart if you don't want to type it what time it is, where you are. Because when you get old enough, you start measuring life differently. Not by years, by moments, by doors that close, by hands that let go, by the exact second you realize you have become extra inside your own story. My name is Eloise Harper. I'm 76 years old. I used to be the kind of woman who could make a home feel like a living thing. You know what I mean? The smell of lemon oil on old wood, the quiet hum of a kettle, a dish towel hanging on the oven handle like a flag that says, someone lives here, someone cares. For 52 years, I kept a house together the way some women keep a prayer going softly, steadily, even when nobody notices. And then, one day, in the kitchen where I taught my son to butter toast, my daughter-in-law looked at me with a face full of heat and said, either you pay your share, or you get out. She said it loud, not just for me, for the walls, for the floorboards, for the ghost of my husband who had died in that house after a long winter of sickness, his breath leaving in small, tired waves like he was finally done fighting the cold. And my son, my only son, stood behind her and said nothing. Nothing is a sound. 2. When it comes from someone you raised. Is a door shutting without a slam? It is a hand pulling back? It is the moment you learn your love has been repurposed into a weakness someone can use. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I was not naive. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't a helpless little grandmother with lace doilies and no sense of the world. I was a school secretary for 30 years. I balanced budgets, read contracts, watched men in suits smile while they tried to slip knives into paperwork. I've seen how people behave when they smell advantage, but I did have one old-fashioned illness. I believed in my son. After my husband, Frank, passed, the house became quiet in a way that didn't scare me. The silence felt like clean sheets, like the inside of a library. Frank's boots stayed by the mudroom bench for months because I couldn't make myself move them. His aftershave lingered in the linen closet. His laugh lived in the den, hovering near the ceiling fan like it had nowhere else to go. I was grieving, yes, but I was also relieved, not because I didn't love him, because we'd done our work. We'd raised our child. We'd built our little world. And now, finally, I could sit with my tea and hear my own thoughts. Our home wasn't grand. It was a plain, solid two-story on a tree-lined street, where the maples turned the color of fire in October. We bought it when our son, Caleb, was 5. I remember how small his hand looked in Frank's when we walked through it the first time. Empty rooms, dusty windows, the smell of fresh paint and possibility. Caleb ran from room to room shouting, "This one is mine." Like the house belonged to his excitement. We paid it off the old way. Slowly, carefully. No vacations we couldn't afford. No shiny things bought to impress strangers. Frank worked at the water treatment plant. I worked in the school office. We clipped coupons. We planted tomatoes. We saved every spare dollar in a coffee tin until we were brave enough to open a real savings account. When the last payment was made, Frank took me out for pie at that little diner on Route 9. He held my hand across a sticky table and said, "No matter what happens, Ellie, nobody can take our home." He meant the world outside. He didn't imagine the world inside. Caleb grew up and became a man with gentle eyes and a soft spine. That's the truth of it. He was kind. He always had been. The kind of boy who'd bring home injured birds in his hands like he could love them back to flight. The kind of teenager who'd apologize when he wasn't wrong, just to keep peace. That kind of softness looks like goodness until someone sharper figures out how to shape it. He married Raina after knowing her less than a year. She was pretty in a polished way, hair always perfect, nails always done, smile always angled like it belonged on a billboard. She had opinions about everything, the right brands, the right schools, the right neighborhoods. She spoke about goals the way some people speak about God, with confidence that made other people nod along even when they didn't understand. I tried. Lord knows I tried. At first I told myself her sharpness was just youth. She was 32, and the world had taught her to treat softness like a liability. She came from nothing, she said, and she intended to build everything. I respected that. I respected ambition. I respected survival. But there was a hunger in her that never felt satisfied. A hunger that didn't want a life, it wanted a display. A hunger that looked at my modest house and saw not history, not family, not love, but value. When Frank died, Caleb came around more. He'd sit in the kitchen and stare at the table like he was looking for his childhood. He'd drink coffee too fast. He'd ask if I was eating enough, sleeping enough. As if grief was a checklist he could complete. Raina came with him sometimes, and she would stand in doorways the way a person stands in a store they can't decide whether to buy. Her eyes would travel over the cabinets, the countertops, the hardwood floors Frank refinished himself. She'd say things like, "This place has good bones," as if it were a project, not my home. I didn't worry at first, because I didn't know what kind of trouble feels like when it arrives, wearing your child's face. The call came one Tuesday evening, just after the sun slipped behind the trees and turned the kitchen window into a mirror. Caleb's name lit up my phone, and when I answered, his voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Mom," he said, and that single syllable carried the weight of shame. He told me he'd lost a contract. He did freelance work, design, marketing, whatever came his way. Some months were good, some months were thin. I had warned him, gently, years ago, that a life built on unpredictable income needs predictable discipline, but you can't teach discipline to a man who confuses optimism with planning. They were behind on rent. Their car payment was late. Credit cards were chewing through their bank account like termites through old wood. Raina was pregnant, he said, or maybe she wanted to be soon, or maybe she used the idea like a lever. The details blurred because Caleb spoke like he was drowning. "Just for a little while," he promised, "just until I get back on my feet." I remember standing at my sink, fingers curled around my phone, looking at Frank's old coffee mug on the dish rack. I remember thinking, if this were me, Frank would say yes without even thinking, so I said yes. 3 days later, they arrived with boxes and bins and suitcases. They brought their life into my home like a flood brings debris. Raina kissed my cheek and called me sweetie, which should have warned me right there, because a woman doesn't call her mother-in-law sweetie, unless she's already decided who holds the power. Caleb looked relieved the moment he crossed my threshold, like he could breathe again, like my house was an inhaler for his panic. Raina looked around like she was taking inventory. "This is a lot of space," she said, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "For one person." I smiled, because I didn't want to start a war in my own doorway. "It's a family home," I said. "It holds a family." That night, after they went to bed, I walked through my house quietly. I touched the banister Frank polished every spring. I stood in the living room and looked at the mantel where our wedding photo sat. Frank, handsome and young, his arm around me like the world couldn't reach us. I whispered, "I'm doing the right thing." The trouble is, even the right thing can be used against you when someone sees your kindness as a resource to extract. Here is the choice that changed everything, and I need you to understand why I made it. I wasn't trying to be a savior. I wasn't trying to be a martyr. I was trying to be practical. Their debt wasn't small. It wasn't just a late bill or two. It was a mountain with interest rates and minimum payments and the kind of panic that wakes you at 3 in the morning. Caleb asked for money, but I didn't have a fortune tucked under my mattress. I had savings. Yes, Frank and I were careful, but not enough to wipe away everything without leaving me exposed. Raina brought up the house. Not directly, not at first. She did it the way snakes do things, slowly, casually, pretending it's not a threat. "You know," she said one afternoon while I made soup, "people your age, it's good to have family around. For safety, for help. You're lucky." Lucky. Like I was a woman who'd stumbled into fortune rather than built it. Then she said, "You've got so much equity sitting here, just sitting. It could work for you." For you. But what she meant was, for us. I should have slammed that door right then. But Caleb looked at me with those soft eyes, so I agreed to a home equity loan. A small one, I told myself. Manageable. Something they could pay each month as a way to contribute. Something that would clear their debts and let them start over. I told myself I was investing in my child's future. The bank officer smiled too wide. Papers slid across a glossy desk. I signed my name, again and again. Each signature a quiet surrender of safety. I remember the exact moment my pen lifted from the last page. The office smelled like toner and cheap coffee. Outside, the day was bright, ordinary. And I felt, for one small second, like I'd just opened the gate to something I couldn't call back. I tried to be smart. I insisted the loan be only in my name. I insisted the house stay mine. I insisted they transfer the monthly payment to me, and I'd pay the bank directly. Raina didn't like that. I could see it in the twitch of her smile. But Caleb hugged me and cried. He said, "I'll make you proud." I believed him. The first month, they paid. The second month, Caleb hunted for work. Raina settled in, which is what she called moving my kitchen things around until I couldn't find my own measuring cups. She changed the living room throw pillows. She put her candles everywhere, strong perfumes that fought with the scent of my home until the house smelled like a stranger wearing my clothes. And then the money. They'd been given my money. My borrowed dash against dash my dash owned dash house money began to vanish. Not into stability, into consumption. A new phone, a new laptop, boxes arriving at the door every other day, designer shoes with red soles like little warning lights, dinners out, weekend trips for mental health. Raina started talking about manifesting abundance, while abundance was leaking out of my walls. I'd see the receipts sometimes. I'd see Caleb's shoulders slump when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd hear them arguing late at night behind their closed door. Raina would hiss. Caleb would murmur. The house would listen. By the 4th month, her respect for me had thinned into something sharp. She began speaking to me the way people speak to someone they consider in the way polite on the surface, impatient underneath. She criticized the wallpaper Frank and I chose. She called my furniture heavy. She complained about my TV shows. She would take over the remote without asking, flipping channels as if my preferences were a childish indulgence. I watched my son disappear in real time. He'd sit at the table, staring into his laptop, avoiding my eyes, avoiding hers, avoiding the truth, which was that a grown man was letting his wife slowly dethrone his mother inside the house that mother paid for, and every time he stayed silent, it felt like another small death. 6 months after they moved in, the payments got late. First by a day, then by a week. Then Raina stopped hiding the resentment that had been simmering behind her perfect nails. One evening, I came into the kitchen and heard her voice low and cutting. Why are we acting like she's doing us a favor? This is your house, too, Caleb. You're her son. That house is going to be yours someday. Why are we waiting like beggars? And Caleb, my sweet boy, my cowardly man, said something like, "It's not like that." But he didn't stop her. He never stopped her. When the money ran thin again, they turned their eyes back to me the way hungry people look at the last loaf of bread. The confrontation happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was reading in the living room, the light slanting through the curtains Frank bought in 1998, back when we thought we'd grow old together and die gently in the same bed. Caleb and Raina walked in and stood in front of me like debt collectors. Caleb spoke first, voice shaking. "Mom, we need to talk." Raina cut in immediately, as if she couldn't stand his softness. "This arrangement isn't fair." Fair. That word can be a weapon when it's used by someone who has already decided the outcome. She said they were carrying the household. She said the mortgage payment they made barely covered my share. She said utilities were expensive. She said groceries cost money. She said, with a straight face, that having me in the house was a burden. I stared at her and felt something inside my chest go quiet and hollow. I looked at my son. "Caleb," I said, "do you agree?" And he looked at the floor. That's when the ash formed in my mouth. That's when my love, my lifelong, unconditional love met reality and burned down to its bones. Raina leaned forward, eyes bright with victory, and said, "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to start paying rent. Rent. To live in my own home." I didn't speak at first because the absurdity knocked the air out of me, like the world had tilted and no one else noticed. She named an amount. She said it like she was being generous. She said it like she was a landlord giving a tenant a chance. Then she raised her voice and screamed it, right there in my kitchen where I used to pack my son's lunch, "Pay rent or get out." And in the silence that followed, I heard my husband's ghost shift in the walls. I heard the old house creak, as if it was trying to understand how we got here. I heard my own heart making a sound like paper tearing. Caleb flinched, then he stayed quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything, though I could have. I stood up slowly, as if I had all the time in the world, and I looked at them both with a long, calm stare. Raina mistook my silence for surrender. Caleb mistook my calm for weakness. But what it was clarity. I walked upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dim light. The house felt different after that. It no longer felt like my sanctuary. It felt like a building I was haunting. The grief came first, heavy and wet. Not grief for Frank, that grief was old and familiar. This was grief for the son I thought I had. Grief for the idea that the child you raise will always have a place in his heart where your name is safe. Then anger came, cold and clean. And then something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strategy, because I didn't have the energy for a screaming war. I didn't have the appetite for dramatic legal fights and sheriff's deputies and neighbors watching through blinds like it's entertainment. I was 70s. I was tired in my bones. I wanted peace, not spectacle. but I also refused to be erased. So the next morning, I put on my coat and walked to the senior center cafe, where my old friend June Kessler volunteered. June was the kind of woman who had worked in finance back when women had to wear heels just to be taken seriously. She had a spine made of steel and a mind that could read a contract like it was a children's book. She looked up when I entered and immediately frowned. "Ellie," she said, "what happened?" I told her. All of it. The loan, the living arrangement, the rent demand, the scream, my son's silence. June didn't gasp. She didn't clutch pearls. She just went very still, and then she said, "Okay, facts?" She asked whose name was on the loan. Mine. Whose name was on the deed? Mine. Who was legally responsible? Me. Then she said, "And who has been treating you like a tenant?" I swallowed. Raina. June's eyes narrowed. "Do you want to fight them?" I thought of Caleb's face, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. I thought of Raina's mouth twisted with entitlement. I thought of my own heart, how bruised it felt. "I don't want to fight," I said quietly. "I want to be free." June nodded once, like she'd been waiting for that word. Then she said something that at first made my stomach drop. "What happens," she asked, "if you stop paying the loan?" The idea hit me like winter air. I stared at her. The bank would come after me. "Yes," she said, "eventually. Notices, late fees, foreclosure steps, all of it." I felt sick. "It would ruin my credit." "Yes," June repeated, steady as a metronome. "But Ellie, who lives in the house right now?" I saw it. I saw the whole picture slide into place like a puzzle. They lived there. They were the ones acting like owners. They were the ones making demands. They were the ones who wanted me to get out. And the most brutal part, they weren't on the loan. They couldn't call the bank. They couldn't negotiate. They couldn't charm a system that only responds to names on paper. June leaned in and spoke softly, like she was telling me where the hidden latch was. "You can stop being the foundation they stand on," she said. "You can step away and let the weight fall where it belongs." My hands were shaking, but not from fear alone. From the strange, terrible power of realizing you have options you never allowed yourself to consider. I went home that day and became two women at once. The woman they saw was quiet, subdued, careful. I moved through the house like a shadow, avoiding conflict, eating small meals alone. I let Raina believe she'd broken me. I let Caleb believe his silence had worked. Underneath, I was packing my life the way you pack an emergency bag, quickly, quietly, only the essentials. I didn't take furniture. I didn't take lamps. I took what mattered: photo albums, Frank's watch, the quilt my mother made, my wedding ring, which I hadn't worn since Frank died but couldn't bear to leave behind like it meant nothing, my library of books, one box at a time, the small wooden music box Frank gave me our first Christmas in that house. Every day while they were out Raina shopping, Caleb chasing work, I packed one box and put it in my trunk. I drove it to a storage unit June helped me rent under her name for privacy. Then I drove back and made tea like nothing had happened. I found a small apartment in a senior building not far from the river. It had sunlight in the mornings and quiet hallways that smelled like soap. The people there nodded at you with the understanding of those who have also been through things they don't want to explain. I signed the lease with my savings, my secret little escape hatch. And then, on the first of the month, when the loan payment was due, I did something so small and so earth-shaking it felt unreal. I did nothing. I didn't log into the bank website. I didn't mail a check. I didn't cover for them. I simply let the day pass like a leaf drifting down a stream. The first missed payment didn't change the air right away. Not for them. For them, life continued. Raina strutted through the kitchen like a manager. Caleb avoided my gaze like guilt was contagious. The second missed payment was when the system began to wake up. An envelope arrived, thick and official, addressed to me. Raina ripped it open before I could touch it. Of course she did. She had been treating my home like her territory for months. She was not about to stop at my mail. I watched her eyes move across the page. I watched confusion flicker, then panic, then rage. She looked up at me and said, "What is this?" I kept my face calm. I kept my voice soft. "It looks like the bank," I said. Her hands trembled. "It says we're delinquent." "We," I repeated gently, as if tasting the word. "No, Raina, it says I am delinquent, because it's my loan." She took a step toward me like a storm. "Have you not been paying it?" I set my teacup down carefully, the way you set down something precious. "No," I said, "I haven't." She inhaled sharply, like I'd slapped her. Caleb rushed in, drawn by her voice. He saw the letter, and his face drained of color. "Mom, what? Why?" Raina exploded. Are you trying to ruin us? The word us sounded like a costume she put on when it served her. I looked at my son, and for the first time in months, I felt no urge to protect him from consequences. You told me to pay rent, I said quietly, and my calm made the room colder than any shout could. You told me to get out. I'm honoring your request. Raina's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping. Caleb stammered, we can fix this. Just call them. We'll pay. You can't, I said, and there was no cruelty in it, only truth, because they don't talk to you. Your name isn't anywhere on that loan. The panic hit them like a wave. I watched it rise in Raina, first her eyes darting, her brain scrambling for a lever, then Caleb's shoulders curled inward as if he wanted to become invisible. Raina's voice went shrill. This is your fault. You're doing this to punish us because I asked for rent? I let a small silence sit between us. Then I said, you didn't ask. Raina, you threatened. Caleb whispered, Mom, please. Double quotes, please. The first time he'd said that to me since he was a child, and the tragic part, he still sounded like a child. I could have screamed. I could have told him all the ways he'd failed me, but I had spent too many years teaching myself that loudness is not the same as power. So I simply said, I'm done being managed in my own home. That night, I slept in my room with the door locked. 2 days later, I moved to my apartment while they were out. I didn't announce it. I didn't leave a note full of speeches. I took my suitcase, my purse, and the last small box of things I couldn't live without. When I closed the front door behind me, I rested my hand on the knob for a moment. I felt the old wood. I felt Frank's hands in the polish. I whispered goodbye, not to the building, but to the version of my life that had once been safe inside it, in my new apartment. I sat in a chair by the window and watched sunlight crawl across the floor. I expected to feel guilt. Instead, I felt air. Weeks passed, and the bank's letters escalated the way storms. Due notices, warnings, legal language that doesn't care who cried first. The house became a ticking clock for them. Raina called me 100 times. Then she left voicemails that swung from fury to pleading. She sent texts that tried guilt, then threats, then sweetness. As if changing tone could change reality. Caleb called too, his voice strained and thin. Mom, we can fix this, he kept saying. Like hope was a hammer, and repetition could build a bridge. But the truth is, they couldn't fix it, not without me, and I was no longer available to be used like a spare organ. I stayed quiet, not because I wanted them to suffer, because I wanted to stop suffering myself. The day I heard the house had been sold at auction, I was at the nursing home visiting my friend Doris. Doris had been a teacher, a woman who once ran a classroom like a small kingdom. Now she sat in a wheelchair by the window and watched birds as if they were messages from another world. I held her hand and listened to the distant rattle of carts in the hallway, the soft beeping of machines, the quiet sounds of endings. June called my phone. It's done, she said. I closed my eyes. In my mind, I saw my old house, my porch steps, my maple tree, the kitchen where Frank danced with me once when the radio played a slow song. I felt a pang, quick and sharp, not because I regretted my choice, but because grief doesn't ask permission. Then June said, they'll have to leave. And the strangest thing happened. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a calm that surprised me, like a lake after a storm finally passes. Because I hadn't destroyed my family. They had. All I did was stop holding up a roof that had started collapsing on my head. I never saw them get escorted out. I never stood by the window sipping tea while a sheriff knocked. Though Raina probably imagined me doing exactly that. Like some movie villain. I wasn't a villain. Asterisk, I was a grandmother who chose not to be a floor mat. Later, Caleb found me. Not right away. Shame has a slow walk. He came to my apartment one rainy evening with his shoulders hunched, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers like a child holding an apology he didn't know how to unwrap. His eyes were red. His voice broke when he said my name. Mom. I opened the door, and for a second I saw the little boy again, the one who ran through empty rooms shouting, "This one is mine." The one who used to press his forehead against my shoulder when he had nightmares. The one who used to call me when he got a flat tire, because in his mind I was always the safe place. But behind his eyes, now was a man who had let his safe place be attacked. He whispered, "I'm sorry." I let those words hang there, because sorry is not a magic wand. It doesn't unsay what was screamed. It doesn't undo what was allowed. "Where's Raina?" I asked. He swallowed. Gone, of course, she was. Women like her don't cling to sinking ships. They step onto the next one and call it destiny. Caleb stood there looking like a tree struck by lightning, still standing but burned through. I didn't know how to stop her, he said, and I almost laughed on because it was funny, but because the sadness of it was so deep it had nowhere else to go. You were her husband, I said softly. That was how he started crying then, quiet tears. The kind men try to hide because the world taught them softness is shame. I watched him cry and felt two truths at once. I loved him, and I didn't trust him. That is a hard place to live, loving someone you cannot let back inside your life without locking your own peace in a closet. He asked if I would forgive him. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to my little kitchen and poured tea into 2 cups. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had expected to shake. I brought the cups back and handed him one. We sat in silence for a long time, the rain tapping the window like fingers. Finally I said, Caleb, I am not punishing you. I am protecting myself. He nodded, wiping his face. I did not want to lose my house, I continued, but I lost something else first. I lost my place in my own family, and I will not live where I am threatened. His voice was barely there. I didn't think you'd really do it. I looked at him, then really looked, and I saw what the problem had always been. He thought my love meant I would never choose myself. He thought my age meant I had nowhere to go. He thought mother meant endless. He learned, too late, that even mothers have limits. I didn't slam the door in his face. I didn't throw him out into the rain. I told him he could visit. I told him he could speak to me respectfully. I told him my peace was not up for negotiation, not by him, not by anyone. And then I watched him leave. Shoulders still hunched, flowers forgotten on my counter like evidence of a lesson. Sometimes, late at night, I still remember my old house. Not the betrayal, the good parts. Frank's hands, Caleb's laughter, the smell of cinnamon around holidays, the creak of stairs. But memory is not a deed. And peace is not a place on a map. Peace is what you build when you finally stop letting other people treat your life like a resource to mine. I live in a small apartment now with sunlight in the mornings. I have 2 plants on the windowsill that I keep alive out of stubbornness. I go to the library twice a week because books have never betrayed me. Sometimes I visit Doris at the nursing home and we sit together watching birds. 2 old women listening to the soft music of days passing. And every once in a while, when I'm alone and the air is quiet enough to hear my own heartbeat, I think about that moment in the kitchen, the scream, the silence, my son's eyes on the floor. I used to believe family was a roof. Now I know family is supposed to be arms. And if the arms turn into fists, whether they're literal or just words and threats, you don't have to stay underneath them just because you're old. Age doesn't make you smaller. It makes you clearer. You start to see what's love and what's leverage. You start to understand that dignity is not something people give you. It is something you carry out of burning rooms. So if you're listening to me and you feel like a guest in your own life, hear me softly, plainly. You are not a burden. You are not furniture. You are not a tenant in a story you paid for. And one day, when the world tries to push you into a corner and calls it fair, you may surprise yourself with what you can do without raising your voice at all. Sometimes the strongest women don't shout. They simply stop holding up what was never meant to rest on their backs. And in that quiet, when the dust finally settles, you learn the haunting truth that also feels like mercy. The house was never the thing that kept you safe. It was the spine you forgot you still had.